Well, we've been talking about love and how love grows. And when we started, we mentioned that life needs love. In fact, it's one of those things that without love, life loses its meaning, it loses its power, its significance. It's just one of those things about it. In fact, Paul actually talks a lot about the things of life that we tend to get caught up in. In 1 Corinthians 13, he talks about how we tend to want to put on a big show or look for things that attract us. But he says without love, those things actually don't really have any power. In fact, he goes on to describe other things that we are attracted to. And he says without love, they don't have any meaning. And eventually he says without love, they actually have no profit for us. They don't do anything for us. Because there's something about the way we're wired and the way we're built that we need love. And then we talked about how love needs humility, because love is something that we actually learn. We have to continue to learn it. Paul talks about when we were children, we saw it a certain way. We tended to love a certain way. Our love tends to be very self-centered. And then we realize that there needs to be a better love. There is a better love. And we continue to grow and we continue to learn that love. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about how hope fills the heart. That comes from love and the love that we feel from God Himself, and how peace is not just a feeling, but peace is a path that we learn to walk so that we know destination-wise we end up in a certain place that we really are hoping for. There's a problem with faith, hope, and love, if we're honest. And one of the problems is our faith, our hope, our love tends to be tied to our circumstances. So when things go well, we feel love, and things go well, we feel hopeful, and we have feelings of peace. But all of a sudden, when circumstances change and they crater, so do those same feelings, and many times, so does our understanding of what love is all about. I think that's especially applicable today and the things we're going through. There are a lot of people going through fear, anxiety. I can't tell you how many people I've come across, you probably have also, at a store or out watching them drive, and you can just see it in their eyes. They just don't understand what's happening and what's coming, and there is a fear that overcomes them. They've lost hope. They've lost a sense of peace, and many times they're confused about what love really means. One of the things I like about the Bible and how Jesus actually taught and approached this is He never ignored those things. In fact, in John, it records that Jesus looks at His disciples and He says, in this world you'll have trouble. So He didn't act as if it would not happen or ignore it. In fact, Jesus acknowledged it, and He wanted them to understand that this was just a real part of life. There's something about the fact that when you acknowledge that trouble comes, difficulties come, none of us are immune from those things. Tomorrow there will be something new, some new difficulty in our lives. There's something about acknowledging that helps take away the power that those troubles and difficulties have in robbing us of our peace, our hope, and the love that we realize we need. So Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. He says, but take courage. I've overcome the world. So Jesus came so that the feelings that we have, or at least the understanding that we have, would be greater than just the circumstances that we go through. And in Jesus' day, the disciples and the people there were going through a lot of difficult times. You have to remember, Israel at this time is controlled by Rome, and they're really under the hand of Rome and the cruelty many times of Rome. And they were looking for a better day. In fact, I was reading one author said many years ago that he could not imagine that when the disciples were meeting with Jesus at the upper room and He was taking them through Passover, and if you know, during Passover they would go through the freedom that they had from Egypt and the rescue from Egypt. And he says, I cannot imagine that as he's telling the story of Passover, as was tradition, that they were not inserting, instead of Egypt, they weren't inserting Rome into that conversation every time, thinking, this is it. He's come to free us from Rome. And in one sense, yes, Jesus did, but not the way they thought they would be freed from Rome. Jesus came to free them from the power not just of Rome, but the power that sin had over their lives, and the power that sin had brought into the world, and that Jesus had come to overcome that power for us. So I want to get you to look with me. This is in Mark's version of the Gospel of Jesus. This is in Mark chapter number 8. It's kind of halfway through the book of Mark. Mark is a shorter book. More than likely, Mark is recording what Peter witnessed and what Peter is telling him about. So in one sense, this is probably Peter's eyewitness account. He's very brief and concise, as opposed to some of the other versions of the Gospels that others wrote. And at this point, there's a pivot that occurs halfway in this book, in the middle of Mark's Gospel. And up to this point, the question has been that Mark has answered, that Peter has been answering, is who is Jesus? Trying to understand who he is, why he came, what he was doing. And so here's what it says in verse number 27 of chapter 8. It says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi is a city on the northern end of the Jordan River. In fact, it's above the Sea of Galilee. This is where the Jordan River, the mouth of the river is, where it begins, right, the foothills of some mountains. So he's taken them away to discuss some things. And this becomes important because Jesus is going to make a pivot with them in their understanding of who he is and what he came to do. So he's there, and it says, and as they were walking along, he asked them, here's the question: who do people say I am? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say you're one of the prophets. Then Jesus asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter replied, you are the Messiah. But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. So Jesus is asking them this question. It's not a question that would be uncommon for us if we ask, who is Jesus? And the answer has to do with what people want Jesus to be, what kind of Messiah they were looking for. So they tended to relate Jesus as, some thought he was John the Baptist reincarnated. Maybe he was Elijah who has come back. There are many people that would look at Jesus even today and say, well, he's a very wise man. I love his sayings. There's a lot of wisdom to be found in those sayings. But this is not actually what Jesus wanted the disciples to understand about who he was, even though all of this time they've been asking the question as other people have. Jesus is actually pointing out that the crowds did not understand who he was. They didn't know it, because all of those answers are wrong. They may be flattering. They may be answers that they would give trying to elevate Jesus, but they missed actually who Jesus was. And so when Peter speaks, and in this case, Peter is speaking on behalf of all the disciples, and he says, but you're the Messiah, the Christ. Matthew will go in and he will explain even more to this answer, but this is the most simple statement about what Peter says. You would say it's a revelation. Peter understands, he gets it, he catches it. But then Jesus makes this statement to them. He says, don't go tell anybody about me. Why would he say that? Here's the reason. Because even though they understand something about Jesus being the Messiah, they still don't fully understand who he is. They don't quite get it. In fact, there are two more questions that Jesus is going to pose, and for the rest of Mark's writing that he will deal with. And the first one is, what kind of Messiah is Jesus? Because the people were looking for a certain kind of Messiah, just like people today are. They're looking for someone who will give them what they want. Maybe someone who will fix their circumstances the way they want. A lot of people search for a religion, a belief, some sort of God whom they can perform certain things or do certain things, and he will make life the way they want it to be. The problem is this is a trap, because life doesn't work out that way. And there's no one who can find a magic wand or a genie who will just fix life the way they want it. And so they're constantly trapped in this vicious cycle of their emotions going up and being filled with hope or joy, and then all of a sudden crashing from those same things. And that's not what Jesus came to do. Jesus was a different kind of Messiah. In their day, messiahs rose up in Jerusalem and in Israel, and their claim always was, it works very well politically, we've come to overthrow Rome. And they would raise up an army, and then Rome would come in and crush that army. And many messiahs had come. But Jesus did not do this. In fact, at some point when they come to get Jesus, before they crucify him, Jesus says, I don't understand why you've brought soldiers with you. Do you not understand who I am? What kind of Messiah I am? And of course the answer was no, they didn't understand. They thought he would be a threat to their position, to their power, but Jesus actually came for a totally different reason. So then he goes in and he says this, this is verse 31. Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later, he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for such things. Yes, because see, they didn't fully understand who he was or what he came to do. So when Jesus starts talking about the suffering, the rejection that he would go through, the death he would go through, the pain he would go through, they didn't understand it at all. This is not how they saw life and what they expected. They were looking for someone who would change the circumstances in a positive way. And so they were in dark times, and what Jesus is saying is, and the times will actually get even darker before the light shines. Peter thinks, this guy doesn't know how to run a political campaign. There's no way we can win with a movement like this. Because as most people think, the way his mind works, just like ours is, we need all the people to rally around us. They need to come to our aid. We will take over with this movement of people. But that's actually not what Jesus came to do. He didn't come to manipulate people. He didn't come to give them what they wanted. He came to give them what they really needed, even if it cost him. And so Jesus is just straight up honest with Peter. And Peter needs to know. The disciples need to know. I would hope that you would think, I need to know. Sure. Jesus didn't come so that everything in your life would work out the way you wanted it to. There'll be difficult times. But the promise that Jesus gave was similar to the promise when he said, you'll have troubles, but take courage, I've overcome the world. That Jesus would be with us. And the power of who he is greater than all of the circumstances that come against us. It's greater than anything we thought would make us happy. The happiness and the joy and the peace and the comfort and the hope that will come from him is going to be greater than all of those things. So Peter, he reprimands Jesus. Can you imagine this? If Peter really understood who Jesus was, you think he would reprimand Jesus? But he didn't. And so he's trying to help Jesus to be the kind of Messiah that he thinks he should be, that he thinks the people believe that he should be. And he calls them down for this. You can't run a campaign this way. You can't make it work this way. And then now Jesus takes another shift. He's talking about the kind of Messiah he's going to be. And now Jesus makes this shift toward who he's looking for to follow him. In other words, the kind of followers that Jesus is looking for, who the disciples need to be. It's a good word. It's a really good word for you and I, because here's what Jesus says to him, verse 33. He turned around, he looked at his disciples, then reprimanded Peter. Get away from me, Satan. Whew, my. And then he adds, you are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's. See, Jesus came to do God's will in this world. Jesus came to change things, not temporarily, not just for a moment. Jesus came to change things permanently, so that God's kingdom and his rule and the things that we're really looking for, those things would come to reality. They would be real in our lives. Not to just give a temporary fix that would make us happy for a short period of time. It's a very harsh word that he says to Peter. But it's not because Jesus is rejecting Peter. It's because Jesus is trying to get Peter's attention off of what he wants and onto the mission, the plan, what God had planned all along. And it meant that Jesus would pay a dear price, and the disciples in some way would pay that price with him because they would be there right with him. They would fail. They would desert him. They would lose their hope, their confidence, their peace. They would. And it didn't mean the end for them. It meant that Jesus was still teaching them. He was taking them through what they needed to go through. I think the same thing is true for you and I. We still failing. We will. It doesn't mean the journey is over. It doesn't mean the lessons are over. And it certainly doesn't mean that where we are right now, even if it doesn't feel good, even if it throws you off as far as the circumstances are concerned, what's happening, it doesn't mean this is the final chapter. It means there's so much more ahead. In fact, the fact that Jesus says this to them gives us, or should give us, assurance that it's not over, and it's not something that has overcome him. He is stronger than these things, just like he said. So we don't have to worry about what's coming because he knows what's coming, and we don't have to worry about how we're going to conquer everything that's coming because he knows how to do those things. In this way, listen, in this way, Jesus becomes our strength, like a good friend, a faithful father, someone that we can turn to always. And he knows what the answers are. He knows the next step, even through really, really difficult times. If you go to the Psalms, David reiterates the same thing. He has learned this confidence in God. And in the 23rd Psalm, David says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he says, I will fear no evil. That would mean I'm not going to fear that these things that have come against me that are so difficult are the final chapter. They will destroy me. He says, I will fear no evil. And he says, why? For thou art with me. So Jesus becomes God with us. When he was born, that's what he was called. He is the presence of God with us. And we watch him and we listen to him, and we have to grab hold of this faith and this confidence that he is greater than our circumstances. What we face today is not the final chapter. There's still more ahead. Then he adds this, and I think that this is something that you and I, it would be good as we're approaching Easter to listen to. He says, then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said this, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. It's a total shift of attention. It means instead of looking at life the way we want it, and thinking we're going to spend all of our lives trying to get what we want, only to be frustrated through life, and at the very end of life to be frustrated, because it just won't ever work out the way we want it to. Jesus says, here's what you do. Let go of those things. Take up your cross. In other words, you will go through struggles and you will go through some suffering in life. That's okay. He can handle it. That should free us from it. And follow him. And then he adds this. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. He means the old kind of life, the way we used to look at life. And it's true of every person who tries to hang on to that, make it work the way they want it to work. It never actually works out that way. They still end up at the end of life losing what they were trying to hold on to. He says, but if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. Two things. You surrender to him, and you surrender to this plan that he has. You surrender to this new idea, this new proclamation that he gives, that Jesus has come to change everything. That's the good news. And he wanted the disciples to understand that he was looking for those who would follow him, commit to following him, and commit to this plan and commit to this message that they would commit to for the rest of their lives. In fact, they would, even in the midst of their faults and their mistakes, they would give their lives to this. And then he says in verse 36, and what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? This is another one of those challenges. So if you were to lose everything that matters in life in order to try to hold on to some things of this life, how would that help you? And he gives another statement in verse 37. He says, is anything worth more than your soul? It's another one of these challenges. Is there anything, it's just what he's saying, that you could exchange for your soul? And the answer would certainly be no. But you could give yourself to Jesus, trust in him, follow him, hold to the gospel, and Jesus himself gives life to our soul. He retains it. He is the one that rescues us, even though we could not rescue ourselves. In verse 38, he finishes by saying, if anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father and of his holy angels. This is the challenge that Jesus is laying out there, that to reject him, and that's what he means when he says to be ashamed of him. In the midst of the world that we live, in the midst of making some decisions and some choices to where we will stand and what we will believe and what we will hold to, he says the person that rejects him, that is ashamed of him, has forfeited everything that really matters instead of believing him and trusting him. I think in difficult times like this, most of us tend to sit back and reevaluate. It's a good thing. It won't be the last time that we do it. We do it over and over again. And as we reevaluate our lives and we reevaluate the direction of our lives, it's a good time to say, okay, but if I keep going like this, if I keep chasing these things, following these things, am I really going to find what I'm looking for? Because Jesus offers something very different. He offers that this life and the things that you go through can be temporary. They can just be things that you're going through. They don't have to own you. They don't have to control you. They don't have to define who you are. When you have decided, no, this is the one who defines me. This is the one who controls me. This is the one that I trust, and I'm going to put my hope and my trust in him, following him. This is why with this message we call it Closer Than You Think. Because a lot of times you may think that you're far from God or that God is far from you. But Jesus came so that the disciples would understand it had nothing to do with their religious status or how many good things they had done in life. All of those things would come out of who they believe themselves to be, and that would come out of who they believe Jesus to be. The truth is, Jesus is a lot closer than you and I think. Our rescue is a lot closer than we think. And in difficult times, it's a time where our eyes get off of the things that will never satisfy us, that will never deliver what we're hoping, so that our eyes instead can look to the one who always delivers. Never fails. He never did. In fact, in the most difficult, darkest times, Jesus still came out ahead. But he had to be willing to walk those with a certain amount of confidence. Here's what I would encourage you. As you're struggling, as you're dealing with difficult times, look to him. Spend some time praying, talking to him. Spend some time reading the Bible and listening for Jesus to speak to your life so that you would have strength and you would have confidence to go to these things. There is a better day ahead. Just like in Easter, as they would approach his death, and they would lose all their hope and their confidence. They would fail him. They would run away and hide. Jesus proved later there was still a better day ahead, because none of this stuff would overwhelm him. They trusted in Jesus as their new reality, as the truth that they would hold on to with their lives. I hope that you trust the same thing as we approach an amazing time, the day we celebrate his resurrection, when life conquers death, when light overcomes darkness by its very presence, when God shows up and shows us who Jesus is and the life that we have in him. Would you pray with me? And if you're here and listening to this at this time, and you've never put your hope in Jesus Christ, it's a good time to stop and think, if my hope is not in him, what is it in? And is it my own foolishness, wanting to control life that I can never control, that causes me to miss who Jesus Christ is, his love for me? Maybe it's time for me to be like John was when he said, and we have put our trust in his love, and let his love free me. There's a price, there's a cost. It is a turning away from an old way of life, an old frustrating way of life, and turning to God in the midst of your difficulties and your troubles, knowing he is my rescuer, he is my Savior. A very different kind of Messiah. It's not that he came to make life the way I wanted it to be, but instead he invites me into his kingdom, his world, his life, the way he knows and the way he will make it because of who he is. You can say something like this: Dear God, I thank you that you sent your son Jesus into this world, that he lived a very different life than the rest of us live. He went through all the struggles of life, the difficulties that I go through, all the same temptations. But I thank you that Jesus went through those things without ever failing, without ever sinning. Not for his benefit, but he went through those things for my benefit, to show me how much he loved me and how he could gain for me, he could purchase for me the life I really want, a life of love and hope and peace that he promises. I thank you that I can find that in him. Forgive me of my sins. Be patient with me, God. Help me to put my trust in your love for me so that I can follow him, and when I fail, when I fall, that I can have confidence that he will pick me back up again, and we will keep going until the day when it is all finished and we see things, God, as you had planned that they would always be. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your faithfulness. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.